I'm Matt Downing, and welcome to Diving Deep EDU.
Curious conversations with all types of peeps. Encouraging innovation, we are diving deep. Certainly education is what we like to speak. Fervent with dedication, now it is time to teach. Yeah.
Hey everyone, and thanks for joining me on Diving Deep EDU. This podcast is based in conversations that are willing to go off on a rabbit trail or two in order to find those aha moments. Those times when someone is able to say something in a way that brings increased clarity. Now, I'm an educator, so much of our conversations will have that as the end goal. How can the things that we are talking about help us to dive deeper into educational practices? Thanks for tuning in. Our guest is Jennie Magiera. Jennie is the global head of education impact at Google. She is a best-selling author of Courageous Adventures, and she is the founder and president of the nonprofit organization Our Voice Alliance. Jennie has had many other roles within education, including her time as a Chicago public school teacher. Jennie, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Great. So, Jennie, you are out for a day trip with your husband, your daughter, maybe your dog, depending if you normally take your dog with you. I'm not a dog person, so I'm not sure how those things go. But you're out for a day in Chicago. I've never been to Chicago. What does a wonderful Chicago day look like?
Oh, well, it's whether you're talking about the world before or current world.
Let's take a trip back to the world before.
This is the world before. I live in an area, that's kind of like Restaurant Row of Chicago called West Loop. And so there's a lot of delightful eateries, and I'm a big food person. I wouldn't call me a foodie because I love McDonald's new spicy chicken McNugget. So I just love food in general, not a foodie, just all food. And so we'd probably be somewhere eating or drinking something together as a family, or maybe going to one of our museums and museum campus, something like that, or with family. In the world of now, we've been doing a lot of picnics actually this summer. So there's a couple of really nice parks near us. So we just pack up a bag full of delightful things to consume again, and head out to a park and enjoy some socially distanced eating.
Yeah, I enjoy the picnic in these days. So I'm going to ask you to get a little bit specific for myself when I travel to Chicago, and maybe for some people that are listening from that area. So you're going for a picnic. Is there a favorite park that is a good picnic place to have a picnic at?
Well, there's one that's really popular called Skinner Park in the West Loop area, but it's always really busy. So one that a lot of folks don't go to is Union Park. So it's at the end of Randolph Street, headed towards the United Center where the Bulls play and the Blackhawks. So if you want a quieter park, check out Union. But when you come back, hopefully the pandemic will be done or slowing down, and you want to eat at one of our delightful eateries. I actually have a Google Doc and a Google map of my favorite Chicago restaurants. So you could go to bit.ly/Jennie Loves Food. Jennie with an IE, so JENNIE, loves food. And you can find all my favorite restaurants with a map and a rationale. And they're like categorized by like date night, fun for groups, because that's how I spend my time, is thinking about how to give food recommendations to my friends.
I need to check that out. I'm going to put that as a link in the description so that people can take a look at that. So you were about to mention one of your favorite restaurants. I know you have a lot, but let's just think about that day out in Chicago, and give me a name of a restaurant you might go to with your family, and the dish that you might eat there.
All right. So that's why I made a Google Doc. I can't pick just one. Everyone keeps asking,
Right.
like, what's the one? Instead of picking my favorite, I guess I'll just talk about that I just most recently went to. So it's like a family-owned Italian place called Riccardo Osteria, right under the tracks. My daughter loved it pre-pandemic, so you can see the train go by.
Mm.
And my favorite dish there is a saffron risotto with these little tiny meatballs. So it's like this really cheesy saffron risotto with these perfectly little plump meatballs with a little bit of Parmigiano right on top. It's my happy place. Glass of wine, just call me a happy lady.
That sounds delicious. So I got a little distracted from the picnic, but I am a little bit curious. What is in the picnic basket when you go picnicking?
Oh gosh, there's some like I always want like a fresh loaf of bread, so I get big like crusty bread, cheeses, and on us like a nice ripe avocado, because I'm basic and I always like to make avocado toast. Let's see. We always have. I love this game. This is the best podcast I've ever been on. They've never much about my food choices. Why does anyone ever ask me about education or technology? I should just talk about food. Um, like if I know you're not. I guess I shouldn't say that we bring a bottle of wine. We bring a bottle of water with us,
Hey.
and water, of course, because we follow all local laws and regulations. Everyone who's listening. Um, yeah, and then just like fill in the blank, whatever looks good at the
Mm.
store.
Yeah, I like that. I don't oftentimes think about the avocado toast as like a staple within the picnic basket. Yeah, that's delicious. I need to add that
Yeah, it's so
to
easy. You just like get like a nice ripe avocado, a lime, and like your crusty bread, and you can just like spread that
mm.
bad boy on. It's good to go.
Yeah, I need to ask you about the deep dish pizza. So I'm a big pizza person. I'm maybe not as big of a foodie as you, but I do like to eat. So when I'm thinking about pizza, personally, I like the thinner crust, maybe wood fired. So what's your take on the deep dish pizza?
I'm from originally from the East Coast. So my mom and my mom's family's from New York. So like when it comes to pizza, I'm kind of a New York pizza gal. I know I've been in
All right.
Chicago for about 15 years, so it's hard to say that, but I love deep dish pizza. So in my mind, there are two different food categories. Like there's New York style pizza, or when I want
Mm,
pizza, I want New York style pizza. But then
yeah.
sometimes I get cravings for like this like very doughy, delicious, heavy, dense comfort food thing that is a cousin of pizza, and that's when I go to Chicago deep dish. And sometimes I want deep dish over New York style pizza because deep dish is just going to hit the spot. And when you go deep dish, you got to go Lou Malnati's butter crust. Don't listen to those people who tell you it's Gino's East or anything else or Giordano's. No, 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 no. Lou Malnati's butter crust always for the win. It's just like you can't go wrong.
Okay, you went a little fast there. Is that the name of a restaurant, or is that like a style, or what's
Oh yeah,
going on there?
Lou Malnati's is a chain. It's a Chicago deep dish pizza chain that you can get. And if you don't live in Chicago and you're quarantining and you're in, California or somewhere else, and you're like, I wish I could go to Chicago, but I can't fly there. Lou Malnati's delivers nationwide. So you can get a frozen Lou Malnati's deep dish pizza and heat it up in your oven, and it's downright delightful. I send it to my cousin a lot.
Oh yeah, because we're in Philadelphia, so I guess I could order that and give it a try. It's probably not as good as getting it fresh out of the restaurant.
Yeah, it's not quite as I don't know actually. I think it's pretty good. I've had the
Okay.
frozen one. It's close. Yeah.
All right, I'll have to give that a try. So it's interesting. You also mentioned that you'll go out to McDonald's and get the chicken nuggets, and those are okay for you.
I just like all food. McDonald's yesterday released their spicy chicken McNuggets, which is like the first time in decades um they've released a new chicken McNugget flavor.
Okay, tell me about it.
Oh, it's spicy. It's just so good.
Yeah.
And it comes with this mighty hot, mighty spicy or mighty hot, mighty spicy sauce or something like that. A new sauce. It's quite good.
Okay, I haven't been to McDonald's in quite a while, but I might have to check that out. So, Jennie, you are. We're gonna transition out of the food.
No.
Jennie, you're the Jennie, you're the global head of education impact at Google. What about that job fits your strengths?
I think that it's just really looking at how we're always centering students, educators, and their needs in everything that we do, and making sure that um, as we're creating solutions and programs to impact education, that we're always thinking about how is how is this what students need, how is this what educators need, and if we're not doing that, then how can we adjust our tactics and adjust our priorities to make sure we're always aligning with their needs first, which is always Google's intention. It's not new with me coming on board in this role, but I think that the reason I was brought on and why I'm really excited to be here is having spent almost 2 decades in this field, and been a classroom teacher, served at a building leadership level, system, district leader level. So all the different roles that I've had, from higher ed to in the classroom, it gives me not an ability to speak for all educators everywhere, but it gives me the ability to kind of see when we're not taking into account something that an educator would need, and to name that, and to like bring in more educators into the room to make sure we're getting their insights, and really designing with them at heart, and their students.
Hmm. When you say name that and bring educators into those decisions, what's an example of something you've been able to name and bring people in to really give some insight into a decision?
I can't give specifics right now, but I can say that, at Google, you can imagine we're constantly exploring how we can build new solutions.
Hmm.
And in the design and decision making of like, should we do this or that, or should we build this or that, or what do we do with this product or this tool? Sometimes there can be past information that's like, hey, this is what educators need, or this is what students need, and it's always helpful to constantly be aligning with like, how is the education system changing, and it's rapidly shifting in the midst of this global pandemic. And
Yeah.
so my role is a strategy role where I'm constantly questioning like, hey, maybe we should check in again. It's basically not assuming anything, and constantly checking back with educators, students, community members, and ensuring that we really are using the most up to date insights to drive the decisions around what we do as a company to serve educators and students.
Hmm. When you're saying not assume anything, what has been helpful for you to do that?
I think it's just really maintaining a level of humility. And even myself, I could easily get into a pattern of saying, oh, well, I taught for a decade, and, I've been a district administrator. And like, I could just like rest on my laurels and say, I got this. I think I know what a mathematics teacher needs, because I was a math teacher, and that's rather myopic, right? That's my experience. So instead of assuming that, like taking a step back and saying, how can I be really intentional? Like, do we need to like do deeper research? Should we have more conversations? And also, how are we taking everyone into account? So my role as a global role is thinking about how the context of a rural educator in Alabama compares to a rural educator in Illinois, compares to an educator in a big city in Michigan, compares to an educator teaching on an island in the Philippines. And
Hmm.
looking across all of those very diverse contexts and thinking, how can we design so that everyone feels that this product or this program speaks to them in some way? And obviously, we're not always going to get it 100% right, but we want to do a good job of not assuming anything and being mindful that there are diverse experiences across the globe, and acknowledging and celebrating that in the way that we design.
How do you include those diverse experiences?
So it's really thinking about the user needs. So it's thinking about, are the educators and students experiencing the use of technology through a phone only, and they don't have Chromebooks or laptops? Are we being culturally responsive and thinking about the context of like the family life, and how students are experiencing technology? Is there, is there a need for us to think about accessibility? Are students who are deaf or hard of hearing able to access this tool as well as students who don't have those accessibility needs, low vision or no vision? So these are things that we're constantly exploring. I actually was on a call the other day where we were talking about working with educators in Middle Eastern countries, and as we explored the interface of some of our tools in Arabic and the text goes in an opposite direction than English language, we wanted to be mindful of that user experience too. So just trying to really, again, have deep humility in saying we're not assuming anything. We want to look holistically at everyone, and knowing that, we're not going to be able to meet every single need, but we're going to be informed with how we make decisions and do our best.
Great. I want to shift and talk about your book a bit. Courageous Adventures, Navigating Obstacles to Discover Classroom Innovation. Can you start off by telling me a bit maybe about your story, your courageous adventure to innovate? What got your adventure going? What lit that fire?
I was struggling. So I won a one-to-one grant to have devices in my classroom. I had no idea what I was doing. And I spent maybe 3 months like very stressed and very tearful, and going home and having a tall glass of water every evening and just feeling deep frustration and anxiety and failure. And this was back in the early days, pre Chromebook this, iPad that, all the ed tech kind of surge in the recent, decade and a half. And when I would go on and Google, like, how do I use this device one-to-one in my classroom? There were very few articles or blogs or anything out there, because at that point, when I went one-to-one, the device had just been released to the world. So no one had ever seen it before. And I realized that my struggle was both a skill set struggle, but also a mindset struggle. So it wasn't just that I didn't know how to use the device, but pedagogically, philosophically, I was so locked into the way that I had learned as a young person. And the first, many years in the classroom pre-technology, that I had to really break free of that fixed mindset of this is what teaching and learning looks like, and really own that growth mindset of I can change and I can adapt, and it is possible for me to be different and to try something different, and that doesn't make it wrong. And so the book was really inspired in helping educators hopefully skip a lot of that anxiety and frustration and feel like there was a support in moving towards that growth mindset, in understanding that it's okay to be iterative and to not be perfect, and to have kind of a text-based best friend in this journey, or this adventure, if you will, in trying something new.
So it sounds like there's these two prongs. You have the mindset and the skill set. What helped you change your mindset?
I think it was just realizing that what I held to be carved in stone about school, that the barriers that I saw as immovable objects were no longer necessarily the case, because I had this powerful new set of tools in front of me. So for example, the year I went one-to-one, I think I had close to 40 students in one of my classes. I taught mathematics in the middle grades, and I had like 37 students, something like that. And I had about 45 minutes to teach these 37 students, and they were split grade. So I had fourth graders and fifth graders in one classroom, a little under 40 students to teach 2 grade levels of standards in 45 minutes. And so, that was a pretty big challenge to overcome. And time was a fixed commodity for me. I had 45 minutes. So how was I going to teach all these students in 45 minutes? And there was one of me, right? I didn't have a teacher's assistant or a co-teacher. It was just me and my young people, my young mathematicians. So when I brought devices into my classroom, I realized all of a sudden that I could clone myself. I could record short videos of myself teaching, upload it to Google Drive, and create essentially individualized playlists of me. And this was pre-Khan Academy, pre any of that.
Yeah.
And have my students access these videos on their own and differentiate. And so I would spend evenings, instead of making worksheets, like creating personalized videos, math videos for my students, saying like, hey, so-and-so, like, noticed yesterday, still struggling with common denominators. Let's try this again. And so I was able to take that 45 minutes and clone myself and create individualized learning experience for each of my students. So like that mindset of, I have 45 minutes, I have 37 students, I have 2 grade levels, and there's one me, and I have, these are the fixed components or features of my classroom. I realized all of a sudden, wait, there could be more than one me. Growing that mindset. The 45 minutes isn't the same 45 minutes for every child. Growing that mindset. I can be different. I can change the way I use my after school time. Growing in that mindset.
And how did that change, or how do you think that changed the learning experience for your students, for your little mathematicians? I like the way you phrase that.
I think that for them, I think in twofold. I think there was like the tangible fact that my students had much quicker assessment loops. So using Google Forms and real-time feedback, normally they would take a formative assessment, an exit ticket, or a quiz in my classroom. I'd take home, my sack of assessments. So like I said, I had 37 kids, but that was one period of students. So I would take, 100 something assessments home every day. And given my energy level at the end of the day, on my best days where I was the best version of myself, I'd grade them all and get them back to the students the next day. But for all the educators who are listening, there are days where you don't get it back the very next day. Maybe it takes another day or two, right? And, ideally next day, but stuff happens. And so sometimes my students would be waiting 24, 48 hours or more to get feedback on that assessment. And the problem is that if you're that young person, you're no longer in that moment of cognitive dissonance. If I'm sitting there taking a math assessment and I'm struggling and confused, waiting a day or 2 days, and I look at it again, I have to get back in that mindset. Like, I don't even remember taking this assessment. And what was I thinking at that time? And why are these red marks on my paper? Whereas with, me adopting these new tools, they would take a Google Forms assessment and immediately get an email or a message showing like what they got right or wrong. And so in that moment of cognitive dissonance, they were getting real-time feedback. Same thing with differentiation. They were having much more differentiated experiences throughout the day. So I would pull small groups of students to have 3D, one-on-one, or small group interaction with them. But then the rest of my class wasn't doing the same thing. They were getting digital video versions of myself doing real-time assessment. And then I'd pull them to debrief that. So it was kind of in-flipping. A lot of folks, instead of calling it flipped classroom, they call it in-flipping, flipping within your classroom. So that was a tangibly different experience. But then even aside from that, there's like that social emotional experience too of I was so stoked to be trying something new. It was exciting for me. At that point in my career, it was kind of like business as usual, where I was teaching the same M&M statistic lesson every single year until the year that there was a peanut allergy warning. So I had to move from M&Ms to raisins. That was like the big change up for that year. Like, this year we're doing raisin statistics instead of M&M statistics. And for me, like, bringing in this technology and trying something new was like a breath of fresh air where I felt so powerful. And I was so excited by these opportunities. And I think that I know my students internalized that change in energy from me, and they could feel how excited I was to try something new. And so I think that they were in turn really excited to come to my classroom and see, what new adventures I was planning for them each day.
Yeah, that's interesting that they're able to pick up on that. And I think that is very true and powerful. You're walking into a school that is an innovative school. What would you hope that school would look like, maybe in a classroom or the overall feel of the school?
So many things. I think like the default that a lot of folks in this field say is it's student centered, right? You have that like healthy buzz of creative chaos in the air. Kids are up and about, moving. It's clear like they're driving the learning ship, if you will, and that you hear folks say like the definition of a good classroom is like you're not really sure where the teacher is. You have to like kind of Where's Waldo find the adult in the room because they're somewhere with a small group or sitting in a carpet or off in a corner building something with a student. So like there's that, but I think even more, it's just like the sense of risk taking and the energy in the adults too, and that they feel like really alive in the space as professionals and they're creating something new every day. And I think that also helps educators from feeling stuck sometimes. And I definitely felt that in my classroom, that at times it's like, am I growing? Am I doing something different? And I think what part of the beauty of this is embracing the innovative spirit is, yes, solving old problems with new solutions, but also helping practitioners stay fresh and stay excited about their craft.
Yeah, that risk taking is really interesting. I haven't heard a lot of people mention that as an important component, but as you're talking about it and describing it, it's exciting to envision that and to be a part of that as an educator. What do you think are some things that foster risk taking within educators?
Honestly, I think it's ultimately, if you want to really see risk taking happening beyond silos here and there, it's a cultural thing
Hmm.
within any given building, and I think it's coming from both sides, from the leadership in fostering a space where trying something new and not getting it right is okay. You hear folks using phrases like failing forward and iterative cycles. But I think leaders modeling it too and saying like, hey, we're going to try this out and it's not going to work, and naming when they get things wrong and saying like, hey,
Hmm.
I messed that up. Sorry, let's try it again. And owning that and debriefing it with their teams. I think from a teacher level too, modeling it in, really highlighting and celebrating the organic spaces where risk taking is happening and seeing where the bright spots are. So in any given organization, you have risk takers. It's just the name of the game. Everett Rogers was a sociologist in the 1960s who, created a theory called the diffusion of innovation. And it's a bell curve that shows that, about 14 or 16% of any given population are going to be, early adopters, innovators, those risk takers. And so they're going to show up in every organization. And so I think really finding them and amplifying that and saying like, this is
Hmm.
great, is another way to create that culture of finding it organically and saying, hey, we see Matthew made a podcast and that's amazing and we should all celebrate that. And Matthew, like, how did you find time in your day to podcast amongst everything else, and tell us more, and just publicly sharing those risk takers and helping not just their risk takers and they're unique, but making the risk takers seem fallible and human. Because the other thing that could happen is everyone says, oh, well, that's Matthew. He's an innovator. I don't have time for that. Not like that Matthew guy. And, Matthew, you sharing like, no, the first 10 times I did a podcast, it was a hot mess. I tried to say goodbye and my guest talked over me and the recording. And there was a lot of like inappropriate language used, or, I uploaded it to the wrong channel. So you naming where it was messy and frustrating
Hmm.
is really important, because then it humanizes the innovative risk taking experience and makes it more accessible for your colleagues who might not have the courage to dive in as quickly as you did.
Yeah, I thought I edited out all that bad language. No, I'm just joking.
Yeah, naming that, like, and then I had to stay up all night and edit it all out.
That's really interesting. So the idea of modeling it as the leaders, but then celebrating, displaying, but then also having these real conversations about what it looks like so that other people can join in. I did have a question about that bell curve. Within that bell curve, there's about 14% of people are going to be innovators, right? Now, how do we increase that within schools? Because part of me was thinking, well, okay, well, we're just going to have 14% within schools no matter what we do. So how would we increase that, thinking about that theory?
There's a couple different theories around that. Jeffrey Moore was a marketing guy who, a few decades after Everett Rogers came in, and he said, okay, there's this thing called the chasm. So between that like upper like 14, 16% of folks, you have this chasm, which then breaks them from what Everett Rogers called the early majority, or like which was like about 30 some percent of folks. But that's a hard chasm to bridge. So his Jeffrey Moore's theory was like, if you really focus on the innovators and early adopters, they're eventually going to pull people across the chasm. The challenge with that is, in Jeffrey Moore's model, it might take some time to pull folks across. And if you think about time, in terms of sales and marketing, like, sure, fine, like sales for a couple years aren't where we want it to be, but like eventually we get folks to like see why this innovative new tool is incredible, and they'll follow along. In time, in terms of a student's life cycle, is a lot less of something, that a commodity that we just want to take for granted. So like a year or 2 years in an elementary student's life is quite impactful. And we don't want to wait a year or 2 years for an educator to kind of jump that chasm. So some of the work we've been doing at Google is looking at coaching. And Joyce and Showers had this research that came out a few years ago that said the most impactful way to sustain long-term internalized and actualized growth by teachers and educators is coaching. And what I mean by that is you could do like a PD in-service training, even for like a day or a week. But then like if you want to see sustained change in practice, that may or may not be effective. But if you have an ongoing coaching relationship with those same educators, that's going to be way more impactful than like any length training. So we developed something called the Google for Education Certified Coach Program. And the goal of that program is to upskill coaches or teacher leaders to have coaching skills, to uplift their colleagues and provide that coaching support. And the goal of that is to get 100% of that bell curve moving forward on the innovation scale. So, the other folks who aren't in that top 14, 16% can still make forward progress. And, we partnered with Digital Promise to do a pilot of this for 3 years and found really exciting data that it works. And so, yeah, you could just Google Certified Coach Program or Google for Education Certified Coach, and it's a free program that anyone can jump into.
That's great. It just launched recently, right, Jenny?
Yeah, just this past summer. And it's based on my book. So it's kind of, there's a time, I wasn't expecting to talk about certified coach, but there is that tie-in of my book was kind of a starting point for building off that coaching model.
Thinking about the coaching model, do they have innovation? As you're talking, I'm sort of picturing the end goal or the target that they're shooting at. Is it clear to say, or is it true to say, that innovation will be that end goal or that target that the coach is trying to work with the teacher to achieve?
I think yes, but I think we want to be cautious about using innovation, without specificity or being clear what we mean. I think oftentimes in education, terms are bandied around without clarity. And then when you say innovation, you're meaning something different than when I say it, or neither of us really mean anything. So the point of the Certified Coach Program is really looking at teacher practice and saying, when you're introducing a new variable, like an innovative new tool to your practice, how do we look at longstanding critical challenges, problems of practice, and then reevaluate the strategies with which we're using to address those challenges. So, for example, take my previous note of, I have too many students and too little time. I'm trying to teach math, right? That predates tech. That's just a problem that many educators have worldwide and probably have always had. One room schoolhouse, hey, those teachers had too many students and too little time, right? So then now we're introducing technology, G Suite tools, Google Classroom, YouTube, all these really powerful tools. Rather than saying, use Google Classroom because it's new, instead say, you have too many students, you have too little time. How might we address that challenge with this new tool and create a strategy that incorporates access to tools that we didn't have before. And the coach helps couch use of innovation and use of innovative tools in the existing problems educators have, thereby deepening buy-in and making sure, again, like we started this conversation, my role is about centering the work that we do on student and educator needs, centering that growth on educator and student needs.
I want to shift a little bit and get your thoughts on the shift to remote learning. What are some innovations that you've witnessed and are encouraged by within this remote learning switch? Something that you look at and you're like, that's great. That's wonderful. Yes, yes, yes.
I think the first thing is kind of calling back to our previous conversation about, Everett Rogers curve and willingness to take risks, is how many teachers have become overnight risk takers because they had to,
Yeah,
right? So
true.
I have some friends and colleagues who used to joke with me, like, Jenny, I know you're a techie person, but just, don't talk about it at our dinner party, or don't talk about it, when we get together, because I'm not going to do it. I don't want to do it. And then, overnight, I see on social media that they're doing incredibly powerful things with tech in mere weeks. And the way that educators have risen to the occasion, I don't think it can be celebrated enough. I will shout from every rooftop all day long just how incredibly flexible and resilient educators are in rising to the occasion and trying new things for this pandemic. And so I think that's huge. And I hope that post-pandemic, we can maintain this culture of risk-taking and trying things new. It doesn't just feel like triage.
I did want to get your perspective on the other end of the spectrum. Now, I'm not trying to dime anyone out here, but what do you think are some examples, or maybe one example, that maybe people are well-intentioned, but they're missing the mark to innovate in respect to remote learning? So they're doing something and they're trying to do something that would be innovative, but it's really not. It might be missing the mark. Have you seen any of those sorts of experiences?
Yeah, I think there are two things. One is just trying to replicate in-school
Hmm.
experiences digitally and saying, this is exactly how I used to do it in my classroom, so I'm going to make it the exact same, but with tech, which is an issue whenever you introduce tech. You're just trying to substitute, which, Dr. Ruben Puentedera has the SAMR model. And, at the lowest level of the SAMR model is substitution. So we don't want to do that. We want to take this as an opportunity to be more flexible and say, hey, we have more flexibility of time and space. And so how might we rethink the things that, again, we held to be true in face-to-face learning that no longer needs to be true? The second thing is, and I think it's related, is really trying to think about the things that we really enforced in our classrooms that were more about compliance than students being successful, and then maintaining those compliance norms in a remote space without being culturally aware or responsive to the needs of our students in this setting. So what I mean by that is understanding, saying like everyone has to be in uniform and sitting at a desk and being in front of a screen for, 6 hours a day. And there's one element of that, of like thinking about purely like the social emotional needs of students, and like thinking like, what is it, like how emotionally trying is it to like be so apart and not be seen, and just have to sit there, and like the physical needs of students, but also the cultural needs of students in terms of, I might not be in a space where I can sit in front of a computer, and I might not be in a space where I can have my uniform or my clothes clean in that space because my parents are working, back to back shifts trying to make up for, another family member who was laid off in the pandemic, or my parents took on a new job where they're working, night shifts or gone all day. So I am, a grade 4 student who's also a caregiver to my younger siblings. And, that was me growing up. My parents both worked, and I was 9 years old taking care of my little sister. And so if someone said to me, like, you have to be in front of a device all the time learning, I'd be like, well, I'm also taking care of my 5-year-old sister. How am I supposed to do that? Because I need to make sure she's not, you know, uh, eating marbles or something. So
Eating marbles.
exactly, and which is something she did. So I just think, we as educators are constantly trying to be mindful of how we're educating the whole child. And I think educators are generally really amazing at that. And we just had a great education on air event with system leaders through Google yesterday. And something I heard one of our superintendents say is, we're spinning so many more plates and we're dealing with so many more challenges, balls are going to drop. But we want to make sure that the balls that we drop aren't the critical ones that, sustain what our students really need to be healthy, happy human beings.
Yeah.
And so I just I don't think I'm saying anything new that any educator hasn't thought of. It's just maybe a reminder.
Yeah, and I think they're really important reminders, as we're moving on. I really appreciate you pointing out those things that we can grasp onto and think, okay, these are important. Let's do these. Let's focus on these ideas as we're moving forward for however long this is going to take. And then when we go into the classroom, maybe we have grown as an educator and we can do things differently when we get back into a physical space. Jennie, this has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate the way that you have helped us think deeper and better about innovation, how it applies to education. And as we get to the end here, who do you want to give a shout out to?
My little sister, the marble eater. You can find her. She's actually a young adult author, and she has 2 books that are out with Penguin, Wicked Fox and Vicious Spirits. Her new one just came out, and she recently has been like a huge support for me during the pandemic and just helping me create work-life balance and feel supported. So she's at Katcho, KATCHO on Twitter. And, shout out Kat, love you. And thanks for being the best marble eating sister in the whole wide world.
It is time for the final word. What would you like to say to close out this podcast?
Gratitude to all of the educators out there who are going above and beyond for your students and your communities. And I'll say the world, thank you so much. You're burning the candle at both ends, and your efforts are not going unnoticed, at least by me and all of my colleagues at Google. So thank you so much.
Jennie, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for joining me on Diving Deep EDU. I appreciate your time, sharing your experiences, and helping us think deeper about these important issues. To those listening, thank you. Thank you for tuning in to Diving Deep EDU. If you like this episode, subscribe, share it out, post a review on Apple Podcasts. All of those things will help get this podcast out to more people. Until next time.
Wow, it's time to reflect. That's astounding. You've been checking out the podcast from Matthew Downing. Hope you like diving deep like a scuba diver. And the show provoked hope, that's our true desire.